Hello, and welcome to the Security Industry Association Vertical Insight Symposium on Critical Infrastructure Security. I'm Ron Hawkins, Senior Director of Industry Relations for SIA. The Security Industry Association is the leading trade association for physical security technology businesses with more than 1,600 corporate members, including manufacturers, integrators, service providers, and others. Here, excuse me. If you look at this slide here, you'll see a list of our upcoming events. On November 6th, we have our next SIA there in Houston. On November 12th, Veterans in Security will be holding its Valuing Experience, Talent, and Service reception at the National Museum of the Marine Corps in Virginia. That's adjacent to Marine Corps Base Quantico. Should be a fantastic event. And on November 13th, we have our next Vertical Insight Symposium, which will be on retail security, and that will be held in conjunction with the Retail Industry Leaders Association. And of course, the following week, we have ISE East in New York, November 18th to 20th, along with multiple SIA events, including the Women in Security Forum Breakfast, the Return on Security Lunch, the Protecting Utilities Lunch, SIA Celebrates and Honors Dinner, and other events. So check out iseeast.com for more information about that. And for more information about the events on the slide and to register for them, go ahead and visit securityindustry.org. And if you're not yet a SIA member, please visit securityindustry.org/join to explore the benefits of membership. Now back to the webinar. Please remember that we will have a Q&A at the end of each session, so click on that Q&A icon at any time to ask questions. We have a full agenda today, and if you miss anything or if you just want to share the information, remember that you can watch a recording of this symposium on the SIA website. Before we get started, I want to make sure to thank our sponsors, IDEMIA, Access Communications, and Sage Integration. We greatly appreciate their support. You can learn more about these companies on their websites, axis.com, AXIS.com, IDEMIA.com, IDEMIA.com, and sageintegration.com, SAGE integration.com. And they have some good stuff for us today, so I'll hand it directly off to you and you can kick things off.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you. Thank you for having us. So Jeff, you're the CEO of CertiPath, very good and key partner of IDEMIA. And thank you for joining me on this webinar with SIA, talk about critical infrastructure.
Well, it's my pleasure.
I'll be driving the slide, and we're going to go through a little bit Q&A and moderating this talk about what our point of view is on the critical infrastructure. I think Stephen really set up so really well. I'm glad that Stephen went first and talking from his point of view. Hopefully, we're going to have double click on some of the things he talked about in his first talk.
Well, I agree. I told Teresa that I didn't want to do another damn security talk, so I'm really glad he went first.
It was great.
Right,
I like the OT-IT conversion. Like, yes, I'm game. So let's talk first, right? Critical infrastructure, there's 16 sectors of them. Ghana did a really good, pretty picture about it. I think that it's pretty much the common definition when it comes to critical infrastructure. Yes, we have a thought of many sectors, but today we are going to talk about the energy sector. A little bit different than the Stevens sector is from, a little bit, but it's still very related. So with that, just talking about not being in the news, well, the energy sector was in the news a little bit. If you have seen the 60 Minutes, only less than 2 weeks ago, when actually Jeff and I was preparing for this talk, 60 Minutes did a segment on how the critical infrastructure in the US are constantly being attacked. And even not the big one, but the small little town in Massachusetts, they have intrusion and having Chinese hacker roaming in the network, and you don't know what they were doing. So it's, I think, very timely to talk about the need of protecting the cybersecurity infrastructure of our critical infrastructure. So Jeff, you want to just do a little intro before we kick off the talk?
Yeah, and I think we've got some slides to share for some of this as well. But at a high level, I've supported the U.S. federal government for quite a while, and as we've sort of turned our aperture to other areas that would benefit from high assurance identity, critical infrastructure is I think, the most natural extension from the fact that they have a very similar sort of mission, and they frankly were not maybe the most interesting around from a OT and industrial control perspective. This is typically older technology. It's not really cutting edge. Some of the AI things coming in could make it more interesting, but really, at the end of the day, what makes them super interesting from a security perspective, both physical and cyber or logical, at least from my perspective, is that they are under constant attack. And obviously, that's what we're talking about with them showing up in the news. And so that makes them very interesting. And I suspect everybody already knows it, but in any developed nation's go to war plan, knock out the adversary's energy grid, their specifically their transmission, but their generation also comes into focus pretty quickly. These are literally the very first steps. And whether or not we're prepared for that is certainly a conversation. And it's funny, I go around and talk to these energy companies, and it's a tale of two cities. In one respect, their sexiest product from their catalog starts with the word bulk, but on the other hand, you've got really unbelievably sophisticated nation state attackers that are now spending all their time and effort on these participants, these people in our ecosystem. And if it weren't even for that, and we heard Stephen just mention it with chip manufacturer, but now AI has made energy the coolest kid on the block. I think Teresa and I are probably going to try to share some fun facts today. But one of those is that the NERC presidents, that's a big deal in energy, testified in front of FERC just last week that there are a number of things messing up energy right now and putting it really at risk. Obviously, increase in demand is a big one, extreme weather. But my favorite, and I'm going to try to get the quote right, was an escalating toxic soup of physical and cybersecurity risk. That was the first time I've heard anybody quite use that phrase, but I think it's really telling. The other fun fact is I think I got that from ChatGPT. So this is almost like a self-licking ice cream cone. And if you don't know, Google started their own electrician trade school. So they are hiring electricians as the latest Googlers. So those are all very interesting data points in this space.
Okay, so the energy sector is complex, have multiple players, and there are identity regulations and policy cover in this sector. There are a couple regulations that we need to talk about. Well, I'm mostly familiar with NIST 863 about digital identity guidelines, but it seems that in other regulatory agency, Stephen talked about the MFA piece, right? The need to do multi-factor authentications. How do you see that, being overlapping and converging in the energy sector?
I don't know if you've got the ability to share your screen, but it might be useful for the audience to, yeah, no big deal. But
I'm glad that you tell me. I thought I was sharing my screen. I'm so sorry.
No, not yet, but it's okay. The funny thing about critical infrastructure is it's already pretty complex. And in fairness, if you go back just one picture real quick, Teresa, so CISA did in 2015 sort of a schematic of just the energy sector writ large. And it turns out, and that's just 1/16 of critical infrastructure, right? So it's a drill down of a drill down. And if we can't get it, it's no big deal. But I used CISA's picture as inspiration to try to create this picture, which is what the regulation framework looks like for just identity inside of just energy. And you can see it's got some serious complexity to it. So I appreciate we're not spending a lot of time on any one picture or slide today, but I think one of the key takeaways I would have from what's going on with all this NERC and FERC stuff in the energy sector, and there are similar things for other parts of critical infrastructure, but now that I've been studying this for a couple of years, so NERC has if you're an energy person, you'll know this, of course, that in SIP 006, that there's a requirement that says in a high security area, obviously if we're talking about NERC, it's higher security, typically generation or transmission, that you have to utilize 2 or more different physical access controls to collectively allow for unescorted access to the physical security perimeter. But then if you look at the overlap with FERC in Order 706, it says to use 2-factor authentication, and that's an acceptable way to go to those same entry points. What's fascinating from my perspective is I've been to a couple of the top 10 largest energy utilities in America over the last 24 months, and everyone so far has implemented that as 2 prox cards to 2 access control systems to the same door. That's not MFA. I know that's how we used to do things, but I want to, as Teresa just said, I want to double click. I think that's what we've got to get away from. That's like having 2 weak passwords to the same website and thinking that's somehow better, because it's just not.
Right, can you see? I apologize. I thought I was sharing my screen.
No, it's
So
okay.
technical glitch. Okay, so we can let's go to the next one. When you talk about that's not how we do things, well, MFA have come a long way, and we have done, there are quite a bit of advancement in there, and maybe for those that have heard about passkey. So in the consumer space, I think we kind of get that those advancement has been implemented, and we kind of get like lapse in a way, right? Our kids have a more secure access to their PlayStation than we do in our workstation. So I know that you put this slide together. I did not know the Lowe's is also using passkey. That's awesome. For those that want to understand what passkey is, do you want to just do a high level? What is passkey? Maybe that's a way to see how advanced we already have been implemented in the consumer market.
Okay, very quickly. A passkey is nothing more than a public and a private key pair. No different than if you happen to have a smart card, if you're in that space, okay, there's a public-private key pair. But the big difference with these passkeys, no digital certificate. And there's a different passkey setup for every system that you connect to. So whether it's a website and FIDO is not for use in physical access, but it would be as though you were generating a different set of keys for every building that you went to. And so this preserves a lot of privacy. There is an enterprise version where you don't have quite the same situation. You can get if a company or the government issues these, like Lockheed Martin issues these, lots of places issue these, then fine, there's corporate attestations. But generally, it's the answer to not using passwords right now in an online environment.
Okay, so we see this in the consumer space. We are seeing 2 prox card accessing a door kind of thing. So that's on the MFA side, and we talk about MFA as the authentication piece. But before even we do talk about MFA, right? I would say that maybe there's a better way of doing identity onboarding, right? In the NIST 863, you can see that the authentication level should match the identity assurance level. And I think the major of our talk was about identity assurance. So what does that come in? So before you issue authenticator or authentication method credentials to someone, you need to verify them. And I think that's the sort of the new things that I think you have done in one of your energy projects, right? Is to how to help the onboarding piece. You want to talk a bit more about that? What is the identity assurance that you have done with your in one of your projects?
Yeah, yes, I would be very happy to talk about that. And I think your next slide might be good for that as a backdrop. Yeah. So at the end of the day, when we talk about high assurance identity, I used to describe it as the summation of 2 things, but it isn't actually. It's slightly more nuanced than that. It's actually a lowest common denominator relationship function, which is a fancy way of saying if you do one well and the second part bad, then it's just bad, right? So the first part is this proofing part. Teresa mentioned NIST 863-4. That's sort of the Bible for how to do it in the federal government, and lots of places adopt it. It is actually a very good definition, and it describes several different levels of doing it. Or this is this IAL that Teresa referred to. But at a high level, I can do anything from I'm going to self-assert it to I'm going to attempt to prove it in an online format. I mean, not unlike a Teams call, perhaps. And then ultimately, I can go all the way to I'm doing it in person, and I'm providing you with lots of biometrics. So this whole continuum of proofing. And what Teresa was getting at is, so we recently released a capability to allow people, employers, in fact, to do this, for rebadging efforts. A lot of utilities have to rebadge their employees every 6 years. That's a pretty common state level mandate. But just as equally, I think a lot of utilities have struggled to give themselves a digital facelift, right? These aren't the newest, necessarily hippest places to go and work just from, the surface of it. And so wanting to put their digital best foot forward, wouldn't it be nice if we had a self-service capability? I'm a new employee. I get to do my entire I-9 process from my couch. And now I could potentially even have my badge mailed to my house if I'm a remote worker, or they want the badge just to work. My first day on the job, I go right through the turnstile. These sorts of things are becoming attractive for attracting and retaining employees. And we've now got technology, IDEMIA, Teresa's company, actually makes a capability to take a picture with your cell phone of your fingerprints. And it's actually good enough to put on a PIV card if you're a Govy. It's crazy. I just continually am amazed at how good the technology's gotten.
Well, we have to keep pushing that, but this is not about plugging. I think this is about like why it matters, right? You need to make sure who you're on board, because with I think the Korean IT worker pretending to somebody else is a real thing. I don't know how many companies on this call have experienced that. Personally, at IDEMIA, we have seen fake candidate or candidate either using pretend to be somebody else or outsource the work. All those, because of remote workforce, complicate things. So you need to know who you're working with and who you're letting into the system and into the network or into the building. So the upstream security start with identity assurance, right? You need to know who you're letting in.
That's a great point. CertiPath is less than 100 employees. We've had 2 cases of that where, we caught it. We now have gotten much better about literally going out to meet the people, even if they're remote, just out of, abundance of caution, until we just implemented this new capability, right? So that is absolutely the way to do it if you don't want to have to go meet all your employees.
Exactly.
Yep.
So we mentioned phishing resistant, right? And I think that's a sort of a good clarification to be had between phishable and phishing resistant. And having now that you have onboarding, they secure, you want to issue a phishing resistant MFA, and that's important in the network of it, because you're gonna do all the onboarding work and then give them a 2-prox card. That's probably not the best use of your resources. But so you want to issue credentials with access with authentication capability that is phishing resistant. That meaning that it's not be able to share or phish over the internet by social engineering. But with that said, so we talk about smart card because that's sort of the gold standard in the federal government. But smart card is not necessarily always usable and practical. So you have the USB key version. I'm sure you have. We just talked about Sync Passkey for PlayStation. Their software authenticator. For sure, I think the message we want out there, like Steven said, if things that we want the industry to move away from would be phishable MFA, get rid of your OTP, your SMS OTP and all that. Those are outdated. We need to move away from it. So, but when we say, right, doing phishing resistant MFA, you talk about PIVCA and PKI, it's pretty hard. So I know that you did something fun about this, Jeff, on why how hard it is to do PKI. What you have done here? I think you asked Grok about what are the
I did. I asked Grok what are the hardest things to do, generally speaking, and so Grok gave me all of these things. Some of which I think we can agree are quite difficult. I don't know if anybody on this call has done any of these things. Maybe you've done an ultra marathon. I'm in awe of you if you have. And I think we split it on to the other side of the screen. Maybe is 9 and 10 available? If you click again, does the chart build a little bit more?
Well, I mean, I'm surprised you didn't say that operating a nuclear plant is being difficult.
Well, we haven't seen 9 and 10.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, no, still not. Although 10 is getting a little closer to maybe our experience as security practitioners. And then I think Grok gave me one more, as I recall. This was a little while ago. You click it one more time. Oh, there it was. It didn't quite make the top 10, but it was number 11. So we agree. PKI actually can be kind of difficult. There are some new options coming forward. We may see these in 2026. For anybody who's around for the 2024 CIGov Summit, I suggested that FIDO or passkeys was a possibility. That is dead on arrival. That's not going to work. But Aliro and a new form of leaf asymmetric may well be the options going forward if you want to have an asymmetric key-based experience where you don't necessarily have to have your PKI on site, or if you're open to a managed PKI. There are some ways to do this, and it is getting easier every day. There are more and more people using these. So 3 of the top 10 energy utilities in the United States are either on PKI or going to PKI for exactly the sorts of reasons we've been talking about. And I like where Stephen said earlier, he intimated that he was going to be blunt. I'll be blunt with this group as well. Teresa, on her chart of credentials, the previous one, you'll notice that 26 through 35 or even 37-bit procs is not there. Literally, it fell off the left side of the screen. It's weaker than an SMS OTP or voice-based OTP. It's less expensive to grab a prox if you're in proximity of it than it is somebody's password. And in the PAX community, we have to worry about phishing, plus we have to worry about people dropping it in the parking lot. Right. So if anything, there are more risk and weaker credentials. That's not a great math formula. Right. It's really time to move. Okay, enough on that.
All right. So let's recap a little bit. We talk about in the energy sector how vulnerable it is. Stephen talked about OT/IT convergence. We've mostly focusing on employee onboarding, making sure you know who you're dealing with to give it credentials and let them having a stronger authentication method to access the network, to access the building. So all that require infrastructure investment, which come to PKI. And it seems hard to do PKI, but at the same time, it's sort of, in my opinion, if you have a strong credential, it's a pivot and a trigger point to help you doing security convergence. Stephen talked about security convergence, OT/IT. I talk about security convergence is like, if you have a credential enforcing all systems to work together, that's the trigger point of doing security convergence. And he talked about one tool to rule it all. For me, it's one card or one credential to rule it all. If that one credential work across all systems, it forces these different silos to work together. So but that's about people. What do you think about there are other identity in the enterprise that this critical infrastructure have to deal with, right? The visitor piece, not just employee and contractor. And there are upcoming topic agentic AI, right? I mean, AI being dual sword, I agree. How are we going to deal with the topic of agentic AI? And then all the devices, all the camera in the field. Jeff, what kind of challenge you see in that, in expanding that and managing the non-human identity in the energy space?
Yeah. Wow, that was one mother of a setup. All right. So I think society is going to have to take the same approach that I'm going to have to take to that question, a sort of a crawl, walk, run. We are just barely getting our hands wrapped around person identity in an organization. This entire back and forth with Teresa and I are all about largely a broad appeal to do better with identity in your organization, in your physical access programs, and in truth, in your cyber programs. That's all true. And we're not great at that yet, but we're getting there. And if you're listening to this talk and thinking, oh, well, we're just now getting to where our HR system is going to feed our packs, and we're not adding people directly into our packs, and we're not badging directly from our packs, you're way behind. That's the deal. You're way behind. It's not too late, but that probably should have been done a while ago. So Teresa's now brought up, well, what do we do about, once people have that under control, what about everything else that needs an identity? And if you've been focused on zero trust, I assure you everything needs an identity. But in everything that I've seen so far across federal government and across even Fortune 10 IT companies, let alone critical utilities and critical infrastructure, people somehow forgot all the lessons of identity, and they're back to issuing usernames and passwords on a per application basis. And worse, a lot of these systems are leveraging service accounts in typically Windows environments that are already for another service, or they're a group account. So we have very little in the way of being able to have a distinct baseline of what our devices are doing. And then Teresa adds on top of that agentic AI. Agentic AI is that problem on steroids. And I would recommend that you just forgot that you even heard about that today. Let that be next year's conference. It would be great if people were worried about that. Our legal system doesn't even know how to work with that. I have a whole separate talk on why our legal system is not ready for agentic AI. But for today, if you just did more with your machine identity, you would be so much further ahead. And we've got this Axis picture here, predominantly because I think Axis, and they're not the only one, but they're definitely one of the main ones that have done actually a superb job with putting identity into this device. And I don't know what they're going to talk about, and I don't want to steal their thunder, but at a very high level, you have cameras that sometimes are even beyond the perimeter, the physical protections of an organization, right? And or at least they may, be right on the fence line. And these cameras, because they're IP cameras, have to have some network connectivity. If you're a cyber person, this is horrible. This is your worst nightmare, that you've got a network drop or network accessibility to a Wi-Fi network out beyond the physical protection. It's literally against every physical security policy, but yet it's a requirement. We do want cameras that are watching our perimeter. So what do? And so what Axis has done and a few other camera manufacturers have done is to put 802.1x for authentication, so that the second that they get onto the network, we have strong keys doing that, not a username and password. Great. Then you say, well, I don't really like the whole alligator clip. We've all seen that in the movies. What about that? That's a second identity. That's a digital signature identity. And then the third one, of course, is, well, what if I can't let anybody else see the video as it transits the network? That's an encryption-based identity, right? Or a use case for encryption. And so in fact, if that sounds familiar, right? An authentication, a signature, and an encryption sort of certificate. And I think if you forward the slide, Teresa, yeah, you have heard that movie. You have seen that movie before. It's very much like the PIV card, right? The only thing we're missing is a cake, but that, of course, your camera is not walking up to a turnstile. So anyway, I applaud Axis and everybody else who's done something like that. If all of the devices were that clever, this would be a much better solved space.
Well, thank you, Jeff. I think we are also at times. So let me unshare my screen. And if you want to contact us, here we can be rich and see if there is any questions. Oh, there are questions.
Yeah, thank you both. Good stuff. So we have a couple of questions, especially that came in, especially while you're talking about identity verification. So think back to that segment, and how do you validate an identity document using a smartphone?
So as a technology, I would take that. So in the platform, we have identity proofing platform. We have using a smartphone. You can use a specific API to call to capture the front and back of the document. Right now, we support of course U.S. driver license, passport, and we do document authentication features. So for those who don't know, IDEMIA actually work for 36 different DME in the nation, and we produce security features on the driving license. So we know where the skeleton lies in terms of security features in our ID documents, and we do security feature checks. And after that, we also do a facial match with liveness against the photo, but in some cases, we also go all the way back, depending on the assurance level you need, go all the way back to the system of record, doing either demographic checks or biometric checks, depending on which agency and state that we have. So we definitely have, that's the identity proofing platform that we leverage and we use to do identity proofing.
All right, one more question here. How do you feel about remote identity verification?
Well, I'll take that. So I think that's clearly a related question, and it comes down to whether or not we're getting enough proof and confidence from that session to, in effect, stand for what had been previously done in person. So anybody who's close to this space may know that there was, starting in 2000, actually I'm the one who wrote the policy for it, back in 2014-15, this thing that became SRIP, right, or Supervised Remote In-Person Proofing. And the idea was to create a special purpose kiosk that could stand in for a face-to-face sit-down with a person. And in fact, that exists today and is frankly widely in use at places all across federal government, but to include the Department of Homeland Security, who obviously is the patron. Well, you may not know, they're the patron saint of all of this stuff, right? So they're the ones who bless it. That's also where programs at the airport come from. So all we're talking about here is, instead of leveraging a special purpose kiosk, is smartphones and the software that are doing the extraction and the comparison, are they able to make up for the risk of a substitution? Right, that's the real conversation to be had. So at the medium levels, or level 2, the answer to that is unequivocally yes. There is an enormous push to get that to level 3, and that is the state of the art right now, where people are pushing the envelope.
So I would say that in the I maybe simplify too much, right? That definitely things we do in the device in that session to detect injection attacks, to detect we have liveness detection, to making sure that there's no spoofing attempt to the transactions. We do security features verifications and so forth. We do IP verification. So there's an end-to-end protection in that transaction to do remote identity proofing. At the end of the day, it's really your risk level and what you want to verify. So in the risk model. And for those that know, another critical infrastructure in the transportation, we, for example, the DOT, FNCSA have come up with a new way to onboard transportation companies, and to register the business. So you have know your employee, know your visitors, but here it's know your vendor and your supplier. So they actually use a remote identity proofing process that provided by IDEMIA to onboard any new company want to register and get DOT numbers, because there's a lot of double brokering fraud opening. You have a lot of companies that sign up and get a DOT number, but they are not actually real companies. So they are way of doing identity remote proofing, and we do system record check, especially with the arrival of mobile driver license, where the mobile driver license is cryptographically signed. Think about the security of it, to know that these identity attributes are trustable and signed by a government agency. And we also do a biometric check at that instance.
All right.
I think it's fair to say we evaluated at Certipath most of the major versions of this capability in the space, and we obviously selected IDEMIA's. I think fingers down, it's the best one out there if you like, but clearly they also have the most domain expertise in the entire area. So it's an exciting field right now.
All right, that definitely sounds like it. All right, well, we're going to have to move on to our next session, but Teresa and Jeff, thank you very much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank
you
you.
for having us.
Absolutely. All right, Mark, now if you'd like to join us. So Mark Friedman is the principal and CEO of Rebel Global Security, which provides strategic advisory services to critical infrastructure and security technology companies. Prior to founding Rebel, Mark was a strategy consultant with Deloitte Consulting and associate director for national security at Accelerate Solutions. In these roles, Mark advised the Department of Defense, FBI, U.S. intelligence community, and others in the areas of national security policy, great power competition, threat management, and critical infrastructure continuity and resilience. This followed nearly a decade as a State Department officer. Mark, we look forward to hearing your insights. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Ron, for having me. Appreciate being here and appreciate coming after the most recent two presentations, which were great. Often, when you're talking about threats, you go at the beginning and don't have the benefit of hearing what a lot of other folks are going to talk about. But it's nice to be here, kind of in the middle, and benefit from seeing what Stephen and Jeff spoke about. So I'm going to talk today about the global threat to critical infrastructure, focusing really on strategic context of that threat and strategies that follow from that, both for security practitioners and security vendors, as I know we've got kind of a mix on the call today. Just see here. Okay. So first of all, I want to talk about something that we call adversarial theory of victory. There's a lot of conversation around Chinese cyber attacks against critical infrastructure and other nation-state cyber attacks against critical infrastructure. And I think we talk about it a lot. We talk about the technical aspects of it a fair amount. But I think it's helpful to understand the strategic and geopolitical context of what's going on here. So we've put together this diagram here to try to show this in simple terms. But suffice it to say that, we in the kind of geopolitical national security community have been concerned for years at this point about a potential Chinese move on Taiwan. And it is increasingly clear from what we see in public documents from the U.S. government and analysis that's done here in Washington, that were China to move on Taiwan, part of that military strategy would be cyber attacks, potentially against the United States and our allies. And one focus of those attacks would be to disable the United States and other allies from getting to the front. And so what you can see here in this diagram is, you'll see kind of a dotted cyber operations line from China over to what's labeled as USCI, there, U.S. critical infrastructure. So everything that has been talked about in this call already, energy systems, water systems. The idea here is that the U.S. military is dependent on that critical infrastructure. U.S. military installations here in the United States, for example, rely on civilian power, civilian water systems. And so if an adversary is able to disrupt that civilian critical infrastructure, then they can disrupt the U.S. military's ability to respond. And this scenario is covered in a paper from the Center for Strategic and International Studies that was released a couple of years ago. I'm happy to share it after this call if people would like to read it. But this is kind of what undergirds how we understand the big picture of this Chinese threat to critical infrastructure, that in the event of a war in the Pacific, you could see those cyber attacks becoming not just kind of espionage attacks to collect information, but really destructive attacks. And so critical infrastructure companies really need to understand that strategic context in order to anticipate how threats may evolve based on geopolitical events that are that are taking place. So I want to now talk through a few different aspects of threats to critical infrastructure. Here, I'm going to go through this quickly because it's just a snapshot of what I was just discussing. But one example of the cyber threat is what we call Volt Typhoon. This is a Chinese state-sponsored group that is tasked with breaking into critical infrastructure in the United States and the West. Again, not for the purpose of espionage, so not for the purpose of just stealing intellectual property or collecting information, but actually for the purpose of pre-positioning for destructive attacks. This information was made public in a cybersecurity advisory from CISA early last year. And has driven a lot of critical infrastructure security efforts in the time since. And I think one thing that can be lost as we talk about this is really no different in effect from a foreign adversary or a hostile actor planting a physical explosive into our critical infrastructure. So I think in a lot of ways we talk about cyber and we don't assign the same seriousness to it as physical security threats. But if you're going to infiltrate critical infrastructure systems for the purpose of disrupting or destroying them, then ultimately you're doing that for the same type of impact that you would use for a physical attack. On the physical front, it's certainly not the only physical threat to critical infrastructure, but we're seeing an uptick in Russian sabotage against critical infrastructure. And while I talked about the China example already, this kind of theory that, by compromising the US or allied critical infrastructure, our adversaries can advance their geopolitical objectives. We're seeing that take place in the European front just as well as the Pacific front. And so we're seeing what we call hybrid operations or hybrid warfare escalating, particularly against NATO countries. And it's taking the form of arson, and other kind of physical and destructive attacks. Cyber activity as well, but physical too. And particularly targeting critical infrastructure and private companies that are in some way linked to supporting the war effort in Ukraine. So this has been a problem principally in Europe, but there are a number of things that could happen to push this threat into the United States. And so it's very important to watch this space if you're in the US critical infrastructure sector, because often what starts overseas can eventually come to the homeland. All that's required is really a shift in adversarial intent. And the one other thing I'll note on this is that, as some of you may know, NATO Article 5, what that means is that if a country that is a member of NATO, a NATO ally, is attacked by an external adversary, for example, the Russians, they can invoke Article 5, which is a collective defense article, and means that the United States and all other NATO allies need to come to their defense. We, the United States, invoked it after 9/11, for example, which resulted in NATO mission in Afghanistan. But these hybrid attacks, cyber, but also physical, that are kind of deniable, are designed specifically to avoid tripping an Article 5 invocation. So, that they're very real attacks, but they're hard to track, and they're designed to be they're designed to deceive. And so that's something that critical infrastructure operators need to keep their eyes on as well. And then finally, I want to talk about this rise in assassinations that we're seeing. We work at Rebel on both of these issues, the threat to critical infrastructure and the rise in assassinations and the executive protection focus around that. And I think often in the conversations I have, they're treated as two totally different swim lanes. And the reality is that, at least in the case of critical infrastructure CEOs, they're highly linked. So, two examples, obviously, everyone's tracking United Healthcare, the murder of Brian Thompson in December of 2024. I think that when we think of that, we don't automatically think attack on critical infrastructure. But the reality is that healthcare, one of the 16 critical infrastructure sectors, and so Brian Thompson is a critical infrastructure CEO, and his assassination had massive impacts on the company and on the industry. And so that needs to be part of the calculus. And then an even more acute example in some ways was the attempted assassination of Armin Paperger, who was the CEO or is the CEO of a German arms manufacturer. That was a Russian intelligence operation attempted to assassinate him earlier this year, again due to the linkage between his company and arms supply to the Ukrainians. And so we see these assassinations, both successful and attempted, by both non-state and state actors. And it's important for the critical infrastructure community to factor that into critical infrastructure security planning more broadly. So I've got two sets of recommendations here, again, for the two sets of listeners on the call, practitioners on the one hand and vendors on the other. So I'll start with practitioners. Now, these are very strategic and general recommendations. We're not getting down to the technical level like was covered on the most recent presentation. But I will say, going back to something that Stephen mentioned at the beginning, we always recommend developing a holistic strategy around this. So Stephen talked about the importance of integrating cybersecurity and physical security and critical infrastructure security, and that is a drum that we are beating all the time. Now, for every organization, this looks different. It doesn't need to be a full convergence necessarily, where cyber and physical report to one boss, but there needs to be, at a bare minimum, a level of integration and coordination. Because we can see when we look at the threat environment that whether it's cyber attacks that cause physical effects or physical attacks that have a cyber component or cyber surveillance component, you're just going to miss a lot of stuff if you're not integrating physical security, cybersecurity, and other related security disciplines into a broad view for critical infrastructure security. Secondly, the importance of intelligence. So I would say, in our experience, there's a wide spread on whether companies have formalized intelligence programs. Certainly, some of the larger organizations do, but many companies still do not. It is very difficult to do good security nowadays if you don't have some sort of intelligence capability. At the end of the day, that is just resorting back to the classic, 3Gs, guns, gates, guards, what I would call kind of dumb security. You have to have an intelligence capability to understand what kind of threats are coming, anticipate both strategic and tactical threats to inform those security measures that you're going to put in place, and that should be evolving on a very regular basis, depending on where the threat is going. Third is executive protection. Obviously, big focus in 2025 following the Brian Thompson murder. It's important that executive protection is not off on an island. So, one thing we've seen after United Healthcare is a kind of knee-jerk response where companies say, we got to bring in a security detail to walk around with the CEO. That is going to quickly drive up cost and not be sustainable as soon as kind of the media cycle moves on. So it's important that companies look at a broad, holistic executive protection program that integrates with the intelligence program and the broader security program and is sustainable over the years as this threat environment continues continues to remain volatile. No indication that it's going to settle down anytime soon. And then finally, cross-organizational collaboration. So been a pretty big conversation in cybersecurity for several years, maybe less so in physical security, but security leaders really need to lean forward with their internal stakeholders across the business to drive a more strategic approach on these issues. And so it cannot be where the security director or the CSO kind of has their little piece of the pie and they just do the access control and the video surveillance and we're all good. The most effective security leaders nowadays are those who are highly engaged with other parts of the business, including government affairs, corporate affairs, communications, HR, legal. Security leaders nowadays need to be championing these issues, and a failure to do so makes the organization less secure. So I want to switch now to recommendations for vendors. So integrators, manufacturers, SaaS, anybody who's selling into security directors and CSOs. Vendors are a critical piece of critical infrastructure security. And the days of selling boxes or just kind of hawking technology without a pretty deep understanding of this threat environment and the challenges that customers are facing and the needs of those customers are over. We're just in too competitive of a security industry environment to have that kind of approach to vendor sales and engagement. So, what we recommend for vendors is developing in-house or out-of-house expertise on critical infrastructure threats and strategy. We see with some larger companies, the hiring of former chief security officers or individuals out of the national security community who can help to rep the product in a meaningful way, right? Not just going and trying to make a sale, but trying to build trusted, genuine information sharing relationships with customers, prospects, and others across the critical infrastructure ecosystem. And that's very important to have somebody either in-house or contracted that you're working with who understands these issues and can speak that language. Related to that, conducting your own analysis. So we did an interview with leading energy sector CEO recently who mentioned that they consume a lot of thought leadership and they want to see thought leadership from vendors, whether that's in the form of reports, blog posts, events, webinars, where vendors have a point of view on critical infrastructure threats and security and can speak competently about that. And related to that is consultative sales. So not just going in and trying to sell a product, no questions asked, but really solutioning with prospective customers, CSOs, security directors, and others to understand these challenges and work to a joint and custom solution for those customers. And then finally, the fourth recommendation here is mission. So, this is a big national security issue. Critical infrastructure security, and our national security in the United States depends on the ability of critical infrastructure security practitioners and the vendor community that's supporting them to get this right. And so it's important for vendors to understand that context and to demonstrate a commitment to supporting the national security of the United States and our allies. So I'll just leave this here. For more information, you can contact me directly. My email is mark@rebelglobalsecurity.com. My phone number is on the screen. But happy to discuss further any of these areas. We support critical infrastructure companies, security practitioners related to national security issues, geopolitical issues, and the maturation of corporate security programs. And we also work with security vendors who are seeking to grow their trust and credibility in the critical infrastructure space. So with that, I will leave it there. And if there are any questions, happy to take them.
All right, thanks, Mark. Really good global perspective. So a couple questions here. What impact do you think cutbacks at CISA and related agencies will have on critical infrastructure vulnerabilities and resilience?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we don't understand yet what the full impact will be, but it is fair to estimate that it will require private sector companies to step up and find other ways of working with the government and getting intelligence and other information that is going to support their security. So public-private partnerships have been a major discussion point for 20 years, at least, on critical infrastructure. And as we see the public side of that public-private partnership start to withdraw, if CISA is being systematically reduced, private is going to need to fill a larger space there. And so I have heard from leaders in the critical infrastructure security that they're thinking more about, what does private-private partnership look like if we can't count on public resources in the same way? How do we lead the way in engaging with our peers across industry and finding other sources of intelligence, whether that's through vendors, proprietary relationships, or just sort of informal sharing networks to make up the gap there.
All right. And referring back to your recommendations for solutions providers, do you have any recommendations for them when it comes to navigating cultural differences and establishing and maintaining business relationships or partnerships?
So if I'm understanding the question right, I think that's probably cultural differences between those who are selling technology and those who are buyers
Yes.
and are kind of security practitioners. So, one fix is hire somebody or bring on a consultant like us who comes from that security practitioner world and can help to translate that. Because I think that is important. It's hard to go into all these conversations and not speak the same language and not have the same culture and just come off as a vendor who's trying to make a sale. But I think over time, the goal is that vendors, including their sales teams, their marketing teams, their leadership, and look, I mean, Jeff was a great example. I mean, he's CEO of a vendor, but clearly knows his stuff, right? And can speak to this. And that builds a lot of trust and credibility with the CSOs and the security directors who are sitting on the other side. You got to kind of start from that place and let the sales follow from that.
All right. Thanks, Mark. Great stuff. Really appreciate you joining us today.
Thanks, Ron.
All right. And for our next session, Joe and Kaylor, if you want to turn on your video and microphones.
Hello.
Welcome. All right. So we have Joe Morgan from Access Communications and Kaylor Greenstreet from Visionary. I hope I pronounced that correctly. I know there's a letter in there in Visionary. But Joe, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, Joe Morgan, Business Development Manager for Segments for Access Communication for the Americas. So my responsibility is to drive strategy, innovation, products in this space and critical infrastructure.
Thanks. And I'll add that Joe is also a member of the CA Utilities Advisory Board. So thank you for participating there. All right. And Kaylor, could you tell us about yourself?
Yep, Kaylor Greenstreet, president and founder of Visionary. And Visionary, basically, we build operational AI computer vision models for critical infrastructure, primarily in oil and gas right now, but expanding.
All right, great. All right, so I'll throw you guys a few questions here, and you can respond. So we'll start off pretty broadly. But what are some of the most significant changes that you've seen in security technology in the past 5 years? I know that's very broad, but
I'll start with this. Wow, there's been so many advancements, in security equipment. It's certainly advanced from the capabilities, but I would say one notable advancement is the integration of real-time analytics, which allows security systems to process information directly at the edge. This reduces latency and improves response times. Additionally, the adoption of standards has facilitated greater interoperability between device and platforms. Streamlining deployment and management processes are also some really good advantages. New capabilities allow us to expand security and surveillance capabilities beyond just physical security. It doesn't matter if your facility has a breach from an actor or a piece of critical equipment fails unexpectedly, or there's a safety violation or injury at your facility. The same outcome is more likely to occur, and this is an unexpected shutdown. And that's an important aspect of operators because they can lose thousands, if not millions of dollars with these events occurring. Some additional advancement are edge cameras and sensors can now use open source AV1 code. This is an efficient standard that lowers the cost and increases the quality of streams. AI analysis data streams to detect and respond to threats rapidly. And we all know about machine learning models. They're evolving more quickly and improving security resiliency.
And I can piggyback off of that as well. The biggest change that you can talk about, you said the last 5 years, but really it's like, what's the biggest change in the last 6 months? It seems like technology is advancing so fast, especially when it comes to the hardware and what you can do with it. And we'll get into that a little bit when we start talking about AI at the edge.
yes, yeah. So let's get into AI a little bit. Obviously, that's a lot of people would put that at number one in the past 5 years, and if not, in certainly the past 6 months.
Yeah.
So what areas do you see AI, machine learning being applied in critical infrastructure? Are there any specific examples you can cite?
Yeah, Joe, I can take this one. So obviously there's a lot of analytic options for when it comes to physical security, right? You have people detection, cars, license plate recognition. Those have all been around for a while, but what we're advancing to now is beyond just object detection or object recognition. We're getting into the ability to run heavier AI models, especially, computer vision, image segmentation models are one option, but then you also have, your generative AI that is being used a lot more, your vision language models. And so what I'm seeing with the AI is moving past the just security operational use cases and getting into the safety and pure operation use cases. And I can actually show an example here. For example, this is what my company does. We do operational use cases, right? So this is an image segmentation model that is running on a server at the edge, right? And you can see this camera is very, very wobbly. You don't have to have a perfectly still camera to get a perfect image anymore. You can monitor flares. This is an offshore rig for emissions efficiency. This is another example of a flare monitor, smoke coming off of it. So this would be an example of an operational use case to comply with EPA standards, right? And then you have different solutions similar to safety and EPA compliance as well. You got operational use cases like liquid leak detection and critical infrastructure. This is obviously an oil and gas site, but it's useful for utilities, for water, wastewater. And you start to get notifications a lot faster, reducing the amount of times that this happens. And then obviously, everyone's familiar with the wildfires that have been happening all over the country, all over the world. When you implement these strategies at the edge, you can start to catch these types of events much faster, react to them much faster, cover a lot more ground. This is an example of the UC San Diego. They've got a system out there called Alert California, and they're monitoring for wildfires all the time with cameras and using analytics to do so. And then, another example is other critical infrastructure like recycling and waste management. How many people threw away a battery without even thinking about it, right? Well, those batteries get buried in these piles and they overheat and they cause fires. So protecting critical infrastructure through operational use cases of AI, as well as safety use cases of AI, is really going to be what I see is the biggest tool when it comes to infrastructure and security, utilizing existing security cameras, as well as like what Axis has done with the RPEC 9 and the open platform to port any application to their RPEC 9 platform. It's anybody can build something and put it on a camera and run it at the true edge. When we talk about cybersecurity, that's another huge benefit is everything, all these analytics, they don't have to go to the cloud. You don't need an internet connection to run them. They can run locally on the camera or locally on a ruggedized server and stream that video as if it were just coming back to the VMS as an analytic breakdown and get alerts that way, completely behind the company's security.
Great. Joe, is that all in line with what you're seeing in the critical infrastructure sector and their use of AI?
It is, with the ability of sensors and the ability to collect data, we're more able to connect the dots and try to get a predictive analysis really before an event happens. I'll take the example of the plume monitoring. 25 years ago, they just wanted to know if that plume was on or off. And then EPA introduced some requirements and regulations, and they had to record and document for a period of time. So if they got audited, and it's evolved even more where they're now taking a look at the elements within the plume, the molecular burn off, the hot spots, the primary, secondary igniter ports. These are all indicators of potential anomalies that could happen. And I often give this example of, when you go out and eat a big meal and, you're processing that food and, you might burp or something. And the same thing's happening really with a plume as you look at it. It's an indication of how your processes are running. So if you're making a chemical, for instance, and you see anomaly in that plume, well, that's an indicator that something's not quite right in that process of making whatever you're making, antifreeze, chemicals, what have it. So we're trying to connect these dots to get in a predictive stance, putting sensors within the process areas, looking at gauges, looking at anomalies that could contribute to a surge in that plume. And that's a small example where I feel a lot of the technology and innovations in AI and analytics is moving to, is that ability to put yourself in a predictive stance, not a reactive stance.
All right, great. So that leads really well into our next question here, but I'll ask you to look into the future a little bit to the extent that you can. But what do you think will be the next major AI development in the critical infrastructure sector?
Yeah, I think the biggest advancement, as Taylor mentioned a little earlier, is generative AI. And that takes obviously compute power. It takes some innovative modeling to collect the clusters of data, analyze them, put them together. But I think with techniques like gains and some other processes for the images, you can take an accepted image and process it to make a better image. And this will allow us to look at things closer on propagation. They use this in the medical industry to look at normal patterns that have missing data. So to dwell down at the pixel level and extract data at the pixel level will enable them to determine maybe anomalies in that pixel. So, a shape that's not supposed to be there, or a color, or, something in that pixel that says, something's not right. So in the medical, they're using this for early detection indication of cancer tumors. And they can do this with a very small cluster of data, and something that a physician can't see or a radiologist can't see will be able to be seen utilizing these advancing computer sets. The anomaly detection, as I just mentioned, will be high. You'll be able to be alerted on things that you just can't see, but are there at that early stage. And then lastly, I think segmentation and object recognition, these all three go together to quickly, at the earliest stage, identify anomaly. So I would say that the technology is really going to evolve around generative AI, and of course we have to have the data compute to do that, and of course the energy to sometimes at data centers to run those generative AI servers. Taylor?
Yep. Yeah, and I would say just exactly what you said. But AI is a very broad term, right? There is generative AI. There's the computer vision AI. There's things that are just categorized as AI that aren't truly AI. They're more just process based. But the meshing of it all together is going to be a big deal. For example, we work with a company in Texas that they're an operator, and they're utilizing computer vision AI at the edge, bringing that into a data lake, and then bringing kind of generative AI to create dashboard and sort through all that data. I mean, no human being is going to be able to sort through the amount of data that AI can produce. And so when you talk about what's next in AI, it's going to be the convergence of all the AI tools together. I think there's going to be a little bit of an AI crash, just like there was a .com crash, and then you're going to see the companies emerge that are doing it very well with AI. And I think somebody had mentioned right in the beginning that AI is a double-edged sword right now. You don't really know what you're going to get when you deploy it, and so you're going to see the fine tuning of it is really what's next in AI infrastructure.
All right, sounds good. All right, so before we move into our next session, any closing remarks from you guys? We covered a lot of ground and even looked into the future, but any parting words?
I would just say for the folks that are like, well, we don't know if this is going to work. Yeah, it is going to work, and it will be a big part of change in the next several years. You look at historically on different levels, and this has happened from time to time again in the Industrial Revolution. So, get ready. There's going to be some fascinating things that are going to be able to do in automation.
Mm-hmm.
And Kaylor, it sounds like we have a new convergence to be talking about in a few years. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Cameras and AI is going to be just as much security as it is automation. In fact, there's a lot of automation companies that are looking at cameras for the first time, thinking of ways to integrate that into a product offering.
Great. All right. Well, I appreciate you guys being here. Thank you both very much for the insights, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks, Ron.
All right, now we'll open up our next session. So Nick and David, if you'd like to join us. All right. Thank you both for being here. And thank you for your patience, and hope you've been able to catch the previous sessions. But Nick, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, absolutely. My name's Nick Moyer, work with Sage Integration, a national security integrator. Been working here for almost 6 years now, based out of our Dallas, Texas office, which is essentially in McKinney, Texas, which is north of Dallas. But my role is a vertical market leader with an emphasis on managing the accounts for critical infrastructure.
All right, thanks. And David.
Hi, my name is David Lackus. I'm the Director of Sales for Aries. Aries is an AI-powered platform that does a number of different things that we'll talk about here coming up. My background's in technology as well as close protection, facility security. And I'm based out of Colorado, and I've been with the company since its inception.
All right, great. All right, so we ended the previous session talking about AI, so we'll open up this one talking about AI. But can you talk a little bit about how AI-powered video surveillance can enhance threat detection, especially real-time threat detection?
Yeah, I'll kick this one off, David. And I think Kaylor and Joe did a great job explaining this, right? But when we talk about AI-powered video surveillance, what I think we're essentially talking about is turning a passive camera system into a proactive security tool. Traditionally, you could say that video surveillance has been used as a reactive measure. You'd review footage after an incident to figure out what happened. But with AI, I think our goal is to shift from that forensics mindset to hopefully prevention one day. Just to repeat that question again, so how can AI enhance real-time threat detection? I believe we can do this in 3 ways. So the first one, it's going to provide situational awareness at scale. So critical infrastructure environments, whether it's energy facilities, data centers, transportation hubs, telecom, you name it, they can all have thousands of cameras and sensors. And what AI has helped us to do is process all of that video data simultaneously. And it allows us to identify those anomalies like unauthorized access, perimeter breaches, and even suspicious behavior patterns, something that a human operator might miss in a control room, obviously when they're looking at hundreds of different feeds. I think secondly, AI can improve accuracy and reduce false alarms. Obviously, we have a partnership with David and his team, and they've been an unbelievable partner to work with, but their AI has been trained to differentiate between normal and abnormal motion, something as small as like an animal wandering near a fence versus somebody climbing a fence, but it can get as specific as if they have a policy that someone has to be wearing a company logo on the premises or a truck has to have that company logo, they're able to detect those feature sets. And the goal essentially is to dramatically reduce those nuisance alarms and allow operators and on-site personnel to focus on those legitimate threats. I think lastly, is AI has allowed us to enable predictive threat detection. So when you're integrating video analytics with access control, radar, IoT sensors, AI can start identifying those pre-incident indicators. And I have a few examples, and I'm sure David has a few as well, but just a couple of use cases that we've seen recently, a vehicle repeatedly circling a restricted area, right? Or individuals loitering near an unauthorized access point, entry gate, main entrance, you name it, for a certain period of time. But essentially, these insights are giving the security teams time to act before a breach occurs or an incident occurs. I think if I was to summarize this up, at Sage Integration, we're leveraging platforms like David's team, Hover, to fuse all that data and all the inputs into a single command environment. But our goal isn't just to detect faster, right? We're trying to empower those decision makers with accountable and actionable intelligence in real time.
All right, thanks. And David, same question to you in terms of AI real-time threat detection. Can you go a little bit more into that?
Absolutely. Nick's right. Traditional camera systems have done a great job of recording what's already happened. And really what Aries does is it brings more or less an intelligent layer of safety and security that really transforms those systems into proactive connected tools. I think one of the big differentiating factors for us is that we're able to ingest data from a number of sensors simultaneously. So whether it's video, audio, thermal, It can be from drones, it can be from microphones, and really add context to the alerting. And that's really where you have situational awareness, in roles I've had in the past. When an issue arises, I get a radio call that says there's an issue, and I go running over it, and then I try to figure out what is it that I'm looking for. Aries really gives the context to why is this important? What are you seeing? What are you looking for? And what's the severity of that? And it adds a lot of operational intelligence to the alerting that previously hasn't existed to the degree that we're doing it. And really, to Nick's note about, being able to be predictive, understanding the environment that you're in. Not every environment is the same, and even within the same industries, the environment is different. So as Aries gets implemented, it understands initially where it's at. So is it at oil and gas? Is it in a casino? Is it in a school? All of those have different normal, quote unquote. And then what we're able to do above and beyond that is simultaneously bring in natural language prompting that enables us to further identify things of interest to our customers. So whether it be abandoning a bag or pulling on a door or climbing over a fence, for us, those are called use cases, and there's no limit to those. And so what quickly happens for our customers is that we move from security scenarios, and as Kaylor and Joe have pointed out, to broader scenarios that are more safety, operational, any number of things that involve external threats, internal threats, machine failure. All of those are viable inside of our platform without having to reprogram it.
All right, so thanks, guys. So the previous presenters have, of course, talked about the various threats that they see. What do you see as the primary physical threats to critical infrastructure, and how do you address those threats? How do you mitigate the risks that they present?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I also think we could probably spend an hour talking about this. So I'll try and keep us under 10 minutes, but I'll speak about two things that we've seen in the critical infrastructure space. So two of those most rapidly evolving challenges outside of the general traditional security that I've been speaking with our clients mostly about is unmanned aerial systems and weapons detections. So I'll start with drones. I think drones present a unique challenge because they bypass the traditional perimeters. Obviously, a drone can fly over a fence. It can capture sensitive data. It can disrupt operations. I think the scariest part, what we would all agree, is it can deliver a payload, right? And the accessibility and the affordability of drone technology today means the threat's no longer theoretical. It's active and it's increasing. And so what we've been doing with our clients is, our strategy has been focused on, again, that early detection and then providing the best layered defense as possible. To give a recent example, we deployed one of the largest radar drone detections in the United States. The request came from one of our critical infrastructure clients to capture these moving targets at a long distance before they entered the perimeter of their 7,000 substations. Once detected, the system is able to classify and track that object in real time, providing it back to the GSOC. And then to mitigate these threats, unfortunately, I cannot share the next step that they're taking to mitigate the unauthorized drone activity, but I can share that our team and their team are able to detect the drones and track their operators. But I'll go back to that question, what are you doing to mitigate these threats? I think it goes back to something I was sharing earlier. It's just providing that layered security system. In this example, we had a radar detection for range. We have AI video verification for accuracy. You integrate that within all the security systems. It's essentially going to increase the speed and the response time of, the on-site personnel. I think the goal remains the same when you're talking about mitigating these threats. It's detect it early, verify quickly, and respond intelligently. The second growing area that we talk on a monthly basis with all of our clients, whether it's critical infrastructure, professional stadiums, headquarters, you name it, is weapons detection. And that's where these AI-powered weapons detection systems like Hover, Zero Eyes, OmniAlert, all three of these companies allow the customers to use the existing camera infrastructure and security infrastructure to detect these visible weapons before an incident takes place. So I think if I was to summarize, whether it's weapons detection or drones, again, the philosophy is the same. And I said it earlier, we're trying to detect early, verify quickly, respond intelligently, but we just want to close that gap between, again, that detection and the decision that's going to be made, because in critical infrastructure, seconds do matter.
All right, David?
One of the interesting things that we find in working with a range of different types of customers and industries is the level of sophistication that they have for their sites. We deal with everything from remote areas, electrical substations, hydro in the middle of nowhere that has literally nothing. And, we're trying to bring them up to speed and build those layers that they need, from just physical security, gates, threat, cameras, things of that nature, all the way up to actually giving them literal real-time eyes and ears on facilities, to places that have 13, 14 levels of existing security, and really trying to identify those things that fall within gaps of even that many layers of systems. And so really what we're trying to do is be very specific with each individual customer, as well as each individual location, on identifying what are the biggest gaps that we can address immediately, and then keep road mapping towards additional things that we can do, as well as things that are changing. These threats are ever changing, and it is consistently something that we're working on. How do we adjust and adapt quickly to be able to cover a new gap, or get rid of a gap that doesn't exist anymore? And as Nick pointed out, drones, weapons, obviously huge issues. Unfortunately, in the world we have today, those issues are growing, and there's a lot of people that are wrestling with what to do. A lot of what we're able to do is, in addition to just the objects themselves, is start, again, picking up that kind of predictive behavior, things that don't look right. People are circling, people are lingering, people are doing things that don't fit in the picture. And that's where the identification of anomalous behavior is kind of a precursor to identifying the object in and of itself. And you really need both of those working well together.
Right. All right. All right. So many of these critical infrastructure sectors have regulations that they have to abide by. So what is the impact of compliance on security and the implementation of new technologies?
Yeah, I think compliance sometimes gets a bad reputation as something that slows innovation, right? But in our experiences, especially over the last 2 years, it's actually been one of the main drivers of innovation for physical security. So to give you guys an example, one of our clients that I'm working with David on, Baker Hughes, they have a foreign trade zone. And within that FTZ, there are strict federal requirements, right, around access control, perimeter integrity, audit logging. Essentially, every movement of people, materials, and assets has to be documented, and it has to be traceable as well. So to meet those standards, they had brought both myself and David in to help alleviate some of those issues that could potentially come up for this site. And AI's played a key role there, right? Tracking personnel movements, automatically flagging policy deviations, producing the client reports, and again, all this had to be previously done, requiring manual data collection by guards or on-site personnel. So it's been extremely helpful for our client. I don't want to take up too much of this one, David, so I do want to give you an opportunity to speak on this, but I think in short, compliance is no longer something that's stopping us from innovation. I think we're able to ensure that the security ecosystems are not only compliant with the regulations and the policies, but they can also adapt to the threats of tomorrow and even the future as well.
So to build on that, one of the things that we see is that there's obviously, with compliance, especially around the FTZ example that Nick gave, the requirement that everything be under constant visibility. So understanding that someone is watching at all times, and it's really hard to do that purely with physical operators staring at a screen. That there's a lot of different statistics, but they say after 10 minutes, you start to already go down in efficacy. And that's where AI really lends a hand in being able to be consistent and be able to look at a lot of different data live and never fail, doesn't take vacations, doesn't have a bad day. Above and beyond that, though, what we're finding with customers is that that ability to do compliance goes above and beyond just is what we have protected. It starts going into what are we doing and how are we operating within these zones as well. And that's where you start getting into safety and processes and behavior of employees and understanding, are they doing what they're supposed to be doing? And one of the things that has been very eye-opening for customers is once we're really doing this initially, when we implement a new technology for them, we come in pretty wide open with the AI. So the AI is picking up a lot of different events. And the way that we manage what traditionally is called false positives, things that you may or may not want to see, is by managing severity levels. And so really everything from immediate issues, I hear gunshots, I see a weapon, that's obviously the most severe immediate need, all the way down to someone walked through the area. In and of itself, is that a big deal? But no, if that same person walked through the area 30 times in an hour, maybe that becomes an issue that we want to look at in the future. So really what happens is this observation and this catching of even the smallest details consistently start to reveal a lot of things to customers that they didn't even know about their own business and their own operations. And it actually starts to engage conversations about policy changes and procedure changes and ways to be more efficient and safer and more secure above and beyond just the pure detection of those events. And that's really where I think the AI, can come in and really dovetail with other layers and other processes and inside the customer's operation, because it's really growing their understanding of what's actually happening day in and day out, 24 hours a day.
All right. Well, I think with that, we'll have to wrap things up. We've reached the top of the hour, but thank you very much, Nick. Thank you, David. Really appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks
Ron.
for inviting us.
All right. And of course, thank you to all the rest of our presenters and all of you who have spent part of your day with us. Appreciate you joining us. Thank you as well to Access Communications, ADEMIA, and Sage Integration. Appreciate their support of this event. And we'll close by a reminder of some upcoming SIA events. Remember SIA There Houston on November 6th, our Veterans and Security event on November 12th in Virginia near Quantico, and the next Vertical Insight Symposium on Retail Security on November 13th. And visit securityindustry.org for more information about any of those events and many more coming up as well. Thank you very much and have a great day.